Mr. Chairman, I visited with farmers in Fleming County, Kentucky last Friday, and my constituent Charlie Masters asked me to emphasize the extreme pain he and other hardworking Americans are experiencing as a result of this inflation crisis. And specifically, he told me that he couldn't afford the skyrocketing cost of diesel fuel for his tractor. He added that, quote, "I don't know how the government says the inflation rate is 8.6% because for those of us in the real economy, it feels more like twice or three times that rate." That's how painful this is, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your humility in acknowledging that both the Biden administration and the Fed were wrong last year when they assessed inflation to be transitory. Clearly, the failure to more urgently tighten monetary policy was a serious mistake. So while far too late, I appreciate the current commitment to aggressive tightening, including the recent 75 basis point rate hike. But on behalf of Mr. Masters and my other constituents who are suffering with these price hikes, I encourage the Fed to exercise fortitude in restoring price stability and staying focused, even in the face of financial market volatility, staying focused on fixing the supply-demand mismatch in our economy. So I have a question about the demand side and one on the supply side. On the demand side, clearly within the influence of monetary policy, the Fed has stated that its inflation target rate is 2%. The inflation rate last month was 8.6%, and as my constituent pointed out, it feels even worse. Given the chasm between where we are and where we need to be, do you anticipate any effort within the FOMC to increase its inflation target to 3 or even 4%? And will you commit to resist any efforts to change the inflation target that would make it even more difficult to anchor inflation expectations?
No, that's just not something we would do. We're shooting for 2%.
Great. And will the FOMC consider reversing the adjustment to the inflation targeting framework that it made in around August of 2020 to get back to a target of 2%?
We'll revisit that in a couple of years. I will say that that's really not the story behind why inflation is so high right now.
I acknowledge that, but given the work you all have to do, I would offer that as a consideration for the FOMC. What is the end point for your balance sheet reduction efforts?
Well, it really is when the balance sheet is at a size that that we can conduct monetary policy roughly in the range of 2.5 or 3 trillion smaller than it is now.
Okay, and we were at 4 trillion. Now we're at 9 or a little less than 9. So you're saying 2 or 3.
We look at it as a roll. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
We look at it as a percent of GDP, really, and so we're trying to get back to roughly the level of GDP we were at.
I see. On the supply side, you testified earlier that supply chain issues and the price of oil are out of your control. I respectfully disagree in part. Certainly, the Fed does not and should not implement fiscal or energy policy. But in light of the impending confirmation of Michael Barr as Vice Chairman of Supervision, I am concerned that the Fed's regulatory framework could exacerbate supply constraints, and specifically forcing banks to sideline capital that institutions could deploy to spur business investment. Gold-plating U.S. banks' capital requirements, seen recently with the Basel Committee's modification to the G-SIB surcharge in the EU, which reduces our domestic competitiveness, and especially the climate finance agenda and climate stress testing that would redirect capital away from fossil energy precisely at the wrong time when we need more, not less, investment in fossil energy, and when a gallon of gas is $5 nationally and rising. Do you acknowledge the role at the Fed related to business investment, regulation, further constraining potentially supply?
Well, we certainly do not want to be and are not in the business of allocating credit either to or away from any particular industry. We want those decisions to be made in the private sector.
Well, on the regulatory supervision side of the House, there is a supply side impact, and excessive regulation, especially in the climate finance area where we need more investment in energy, that could have an impact on your inflation fight. Finally, a question about Fed independence. Last week, my Democrat colleagues passed a bill out of the House that would add to the Federal Reserve's mandate by tasking the board with the additional responsibility of addressing racial and socioeconomic disparities rather than remain focused on price stability. My question is, when inflation hurts minority and low-income populations the most, do you believe giving the Fed new responsibilities that fall outside of its core competency would politicize the Fed and compromise your independence, precisely when you should be focused on combating inflation?
The gentleman's time has expired.
We'd love an answer to that question, Madam Chair.
I think Mr. Powell can submit that in writing and forward it to you.
Then I'll just say, I think the public.
Just very quickly then, because we've got
Sure.
people waiting and you have a hard stop at 1.
I just was going to say that the public's been well served by the dual mandate, and I would be concerned with any statutory requirement that sets us up to be accountable for achieving things that we can't achieve with our tools. And I do think that's a concern.
Thank you.
There.
Thank you.